Chris Doyle, a commentator on Middle East affairs and the director of the Council for British Arab Understanding. A warm welcome to you, Chris. So 11 members of the same family, we understand, have reportedly been killed by tank fire in Gaza City. That's according to Gaza's civil defence. I mean, the Israeli military claims several so-called terrorists, their words, were exiting a tunnel and approaching Israeli soldiers on this so-called Israeli line of control, the yellow line. I appreciate this information, Chris, may be new to you, but it's hard to square these two narratives, especially in the context of a hopeful peace in Gaza. What does an incident like that say to you?
Well, it shows how precarious the ceasefire is right now. It highlights that Israel is still prepared to use all force necessary if it so chooses. It also shows this issue of the yellow line, as your reporter was so ably demonstrating. It's a kill line. It's one of Palestinian crosses, you're going to be executed. And this is unprecedented. Of course, there was no such thing in the Trump 20-point plan. Just because a Palestinian crosses that line is no excuse for Israeli forces to open fire and use lethal force. So if, on the other hand, you believe the Israeli version of this, that this was an attack mounted via an attack tunnel, then quite surely the Israeli authorities will have some evidence of this, that there will be footage of it, that there will be some way of trying to demonstrate that they have acted appropriately. I rather fear that that's not going to be the case, because I think it's far more likely that we would have seen the opening of fire by these tanks. And one of the features of this is that there is simply no real oversight of how Israeli forces conduct themselves in Gaza. There hasn't been for ages, particularly over the last 2 years. So if a tank does open fire, there's no real sign or evidence that the commander, the local commander who does that, is ever held to account, or that there is a proper investigation. So these incidents will continue. And I think that a lot of talk is made about the failure so far, or the inability so far, to be able to return the dead bodies of Israeli hostages, which of course, it is serious. But
well, look, Chris, let me ask you about that, because Chris, what is your evaluation of how the return of the bodies of Israeli captives is taking place? I mean, Israel has blamed Hamas for dragging its feet. Hamas says it needs heavy machinery and specialist help. Another body we know has been handed over to Israel via the Red Cross. Your sense of how this is proceeding?
Well, obviously, it's very, very hard to know the precise details. There's an estimated 61 million tons of rubble in Gaza, and we've all seen the footage. So I think that when Hamas says it's very difficult to locate the bodies under that rubble, remember, much of that rubble is contaminated with unexploded ordnance and with other contaminants such as asbestos, that it's a reasonable point. Now, that does not mean that, those who are trying to monitor all of this aren't going to try to keep the pressure up on Hamas. There can't be any question that they would be allowed to hold back bodies deliberately. But I do think there needs to be some understanding. So I think what we need to see right now is at least that Hamas and other groups are making the best efforts possible to try to find these bodies, and that, of course, we're hearing about Turkish assistance in this, that all the equipment, the fuel, because that's an obviously very short supply, is allowed in to permit them to be able to do that. Now, how many, of course, of these bodies would lie in that Israeli-controlled area, the 53% of Gaza, where Palestinians can't go to? So all of these issues really speak to the challenges of this. I don't think it should be an issue that holds up other areas of the proposals and the agreed terms.
Well, we're looking, Chris, as you've been speaking, at some scenes from Khan Yunis, some live shots that are coming there of the excavations in the ruins of that part of the Gaza Strip, as officials there do try to continue looking for the bodies of Not only the Israeli captives, but of course what we understand to be possibly 10,000 Palestinians buried under the rubble as well. I mean, meanwhile, of course, Chris, Palestinian forensic experts are working to identify at least 120 bodies returned to Gaza by Israel, marked, some of them only with numbers, some of whom were blindfolded, bound to the hands and feet or bearing gunshot wounds. 15 Palestinians for every Israeli body. That's the plan. The arithmetic, of course, is grim, but it speaks of how Israel has used the withholding of bodies almost as a form of currency, some bearing marks of torture and execution.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Israel makes a habit of this. There's estimates of over 270 bodies that Israel has held, some for an extremely long period of time. We're not just talking about Gaza, but also from the West Bank. So Israel has detained, as you know, thousands of Palestinians from Gaza. They haven't all been released in this deal. It still holds them, those that are held without trial. And I think that what strikes me is that the way in the international arena that the focus is so much on the Israeli hostages, which is understandable, but there's absolutely no coverage of these Palestinian prisoners and detainees, the condition in which they are released, where were they held, the torture, even the accusations of sexual abuse. This is all very much downplayed. But of course, for Palestinians, it's extremely real, very raw. And it just shows so much how the coverage and the political debate in the United States and Europe and in other countries has gone, that there is always this focus on what happens to Israelis and less so as to what happens to Palestinians. These are shocking scenes, and it needs to be called out by global leaders. And there needs to be accountability. There needs to be a mechanism to actually determine who is responsible for all of this. And that is completely absent in that 20-point plan deal, deliberately absent. There is no question the United States or Israel is going to want to allow any such judicial mechanism.
All right, Chris, many thanks for walking us through the backdrop of what will essentially be the start of the second phase of ceasefire talks in Egypt, resuming on Saturday, with the hope, of course, of pushing this forward in a concerted manner. Chris Doyle, a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.